Like any other pious Jew, Jesus traveled to Jerusalem every year for the feast of the Passover, so as to celebrate this great Jewish festival. The road from Galilee to Jerusalem led up to the east gate of the city. Actually, this gate led directly into the temple, into an area where sheep, lambs, and animals were sold so that people would be able to offer them up as sacrifice. One can imagine, therefore, for someone who was on a pilgrimage with pious thoughts on one's mind as one made the journey, how shocking it must have been if a marketplace is the first scene you encounter. It comes as a bit of an anticlimax and shock. Jesus' immediate reaction was to feel that something was out of place, that this should not be so. The house of God should be a house of prayer and not a place of commerce and business. Jesus turns his shock into action and starts driving anyone who was in his way out of the temple. When challenged by the elders, Jesus makes an interesting comment. "I will destroy this temple and rebuild it in 3 days." The temple will no longer be the place where one could encounter God, but rather the encounter with God from now on will be through the person of Jesus. From now on, it is the body of Christ that is the true house of God. The early disciples came to realize that Jesus was actually God incarnate, the Word made flesh. That is why, for the Christians, the temple no longer held the same significance as it did for the Jews. In driving the merchants out of the temple, Jesus is being driven by a certain zeal and love of God. He is not indifferent, but takes concrete action. He could easily have continued about his business and let things be. In his Lenten message for this year, Pope Francis says that faced with disturbing news, reports, and troubling images of human suffering, we are tempted by indifference. The Pope actually speaks of a globalization of indifference, which we Christians need to confront. God is not indifferent to our world. He actually loves us so much that he gave his Son to share in our human reality. The temple of the body of Jesus was indeed destroyed when he had to endure a terrible passion and end up crucified on the cross. But faithful to his promise, on the third day he did rise again, and with him the community of believers. The early Christians came to an even deeper realization. After Jesus' resurrection, they came to identify themselves with the body of Christ, with the risen Lord. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, said clearly, "You are the body of Christ." The early Christians were a persecuted church, and they saw in their suffering a continuation of Jesus' own suffering for the redemption of humanity. We do live nowadays in an era where Christians are being martyred publicly. The Holy Father urges us not to be indifferent, but to be engaged. First, through prayer, praying for the needs of those who suffer, firmly believing in the power of prayer. Then, through acts of charity, especially towards those who are poor and in need. Indeed, if Jesus lives in us and we live in him, then we are the body of Jesus, his living temple. It is our mission today to bring Jesus to others.